and welcome to KUBBY TV. This is Steve KUBBY, your host. Now, recently in California, we had an attempt to pass AB 604. And it was a rather disappointing effort because it seemed to me that in reading the bill that they were creating a new police force, creating new laws that could put people in jail. Frankly, I just didn't see the advantage of it, and it seemed to be something that was concocted out of fear and without any attention to the real needs of patients. So we're going to take a look today at the paradigm of the drug policy reform movement and whether or not that paradigm is really valid, and if there's really a systemic failure on the part of the drug policy reform leadership to really accomplish meaningful change. Now, what is meaningful change? Well, first of all, it's taking all the bad laws off the books. I mean, if some effort does not include in it the removal of bad laws, count me out. I mean, as long as, this is what we learned from Prop 215, as long as bad laws remain on the books, the police and prosecutors will find a way to use those laws against us to continue to arrest, prosecute, and incarcerate people because they use cannabis. So I think, it's time to look at these issues. We're going to start out with my good friend Patrick McCartney, a courageous man who stood up for us as city editor of the Auburn Journal and lost his job as a result, but certainly demonstrated his integrity as a journalist. Then we're going to hear from DJ Cote, the executive director of PAN, and we'll hear two different points of view about how or if the leadership of the drug policy reform movement is really acting in our best interest. So first, let's hear from Patrick McCartney. What is your opinion of AB 604?
The political climate changed with Eric Holder's announcement. The memo repeatedly called for strong and effective regulation of commercial sales and growing. And I think by gutting and amending AB 604, Ammiano is introducing a bill that has the potential of passing in the closing 10 days of the California legislature. I think that's where reform is headed right now, is the Obama administration has decided to allow reform to proceed in the states. As that happens, there will be growing political pressure to reform at the federal level. I really do see a new consensus being developed over marijuana in specifics and hopefully over the larger drug policy issues. A couple things play into that. The memo made it a point to tell U.S. attorneys that the size of the grow was no longer the sole reason to prosecute. And I think that was very important for federal prosecutors to hear. But it's really the political situation. In the days after Eric Holder's announcement, I did not see a single political backlash. There were no guests on the Sunday morning talk shows following that criticizing the administration's announcement. As I say, I think we're seeing a new consensus develop. I think that over the next couple years, we'll have a very favorable climate for reform at both the state and federal level.
Now, Pat, what about those who say that we're just doing the federal enforcement for them and we're passing more bad laws instead of getting rid of the bad laws that are already on the books?
It's a fair question. As most people know, without state law enforcement, federal authorities are pretty much powerless to eliminate a a legal state market. They've relied on sub rosa cooperation, one police officer to another, part of the police officer culture. And that's no longer on the table. The California public safety lobbyists have had state lawmakers in their hands. They've opposed any regulation of legal sales. And in California, that's been the line that police drew in the sand in 1996, and it hasn't changed. California lawmakers have not had the fortitude to defy law enforcement and stand up to the federal government. Now, hopefully, that'll change quite a bit. Even if some dead enders, and I'm thinking of Melinda Haig, still want to talk tough, they've lost the political battle within the Obama administration. I took it as a very favorable sign that Gil Kurlikowski was promoted sideways out of the drug czar's office. The landscape has changed politically, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I think Patrick did a good job of summing up the progressive, mainstream, generally accepted view of where we're at in the drug war. But for some of us, that just doesn't wash. And I think one person that's good at articulating that is DJ Cote, who's the executive director of PAN. And DJ, what do you think of AB 604?
You know, Tom Ammiano has tried to get a bill passed 3 times now to regulate medical marijuana in the state of California, to develop statewide regulations. And last week was our state legislature's final week in session, and they began to resurrect a bill that was killed in May and stuff that bill inside of another bill and add all kinds of 11th hour provisions to try to create what they're calling a rigorous seed to sale registration program, which is in reaction to the memo and the recent U.S. Senate Judiciary hearing to try to appease the feds. I mean, that's exactly what the attempt was by our California state legislature last week, was to try to ram a bill through as quickly as possible that doesn't benefit California, it doesn't benefit the taxpayer, it doesn't benefit the patients, but it is the assumption of our state legislature that somehow this would appease the federal government.
And what kind of input were patients allowed to make into this bill?
You know, we attempted to work with Tom Ammiano's office months ago, even back when this bill was called AB 2312 a couple years ago, and his office became less and less receptive to input even from his own constituents. And what we learned from his Sacramento office was that they were working with a group of industry lobbyists. They were getting their input and information from them, and they didn't need to hear from patient advocates because, as they said, we were anti-regulation, which is not true. Myself and other patient advocates in the state have worked tirelessly to create good local regulations and guidelines, have created task forces and working groups in different communities. So to be told we were anti-regulation was a slap in the face. And we know that that came from the industry lobbyists telling him not to work with people like myself and others.
And who are these industry lobbyists that have the apparent monopoly as far as the ear of these legislators?
Well, you know, I mean, the main organization that has done a lot of damage here in the state of California has been Americans for Safe Access. They funded and supported an effort in LA to pass a limited immunity ban on dispensaries in the city of Los Angeles. And they were the ones at the table in Sacramento during this 11th hour to create this appointed, unaccountable board medical marijuana enforcement where all the fees, all the fines charged to patients in dispensaries would fully fund the salaries, the pensions, the benefits, and the staff for this 11-person unaccountable appointed board of enforcement. It's really sneaky. It's really tricky. They're really trying to gift wrap it as we're protecting Proposition 215 and we're protecting the patients when it couldn't be further from the truth, Steve.
Well, what other lobbyists are you referring to?
Well, the main people that have been down there in support of this effort have been members of Americans for Safe Access. It's been California Normal. There have been some support from within a group that calls themselves the Coalition for Cannabis Policy Reform, MPP, and others have been in and out of that chamber and sat at that table in support of what Tom Ammiano was doing.
Well, what you're suggesting sounds like a heresy.
It is, Steve. It really, really is. I mean, these organizations, because they're able to raise hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, they can package themselves and market themselves however they want to the general population. So to one group of people, they're the ones you go to that are going to save the day and they're going to help you and they're going to do all this murky and ugly political work for you, when in essence what they are trying to do is carve out a niche for a handful of their friends to be able to acquire medical marijuana permits in the state of California and no one else.
Let's take one moment now before we say goodbye. I'd like you to send a message out to Tom Ammiano about what he should be doing right now to bring his bill into a more patient-friendly status.
Well, he needs to bring all of the appropriate people to the table to talk about this and not just get his input and advice from a handful of people that have basically been deemed in the state of California as the marijuana mafia, is what they're known, this little group of lobbyists, and that he needs to get input from the patient community, the advocacy community, those people who provide compassion programs. This bill that Tom was supporting was going to be so expensive that collectives weren't going to be able to afford to give medicine away for free anymore. He needs to know what harm that his proposal may cause, not just what good it might do. And again, it's still, this is still him reacting. This is Sacramento having a knee-jerk reaction to what the feds said, even though we know from past experience that the feds are going to keep banging in the heads of medical marijuana patients until we remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, but I can't let you go without asking you for some more details about this term, marijuana mafia.
It's actually relatively new to me. It's one that's used out of the Bay Area to refer to those people within the industry that are trying to create this coercive monopoly of a handful of dispensaries that will hold all of the permits and licenses in the state of California.
And how did this term get started? Do you have any idea?
I don't. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly who started the term, and exactly who gets put under that umbrella. But yeah, that's a term I heard come out of the Bay Area describing these people who are raising money and lining the pockets of politicians to try to get them to draft legislation the way they want it.
Now, is this a term that the police made up, or a term that our own people have made up?
I think this came from within our own community. It shows you how fractured we are here in the medical marijuana movement, between those who want all the control and the power over marijuana and those who just want to be free.
Okay, well, that's obviously a very different view and probably heresy to a lot of people. But I think it's time for us to consider which paradigm is really going to work for us. Do we want to continue to dilute our rights and compromise to appease a group of essentially terrorist police and prosecutors and these lobbyists, the politicians? Or is it time to follow a new path, such as that being led by New Jersey weed man of jury nullification? For me, having gone before a jury and now having the protection of a jury decision protecting me against further harassment, I say the real answer is for each of us to stand up individually and courageously and be supported by our friends when we oppose a prosecution and take a trial to jury. When I go and give jury support, it's only for those people who are directly opposing and fighting this war on drugs in the courts where it matters before a jury of their peers. This has been Steve KUBBY for Pot TV, for KUBBY TV, for Cannabis Culture Magazine, telling you, join us tomorrow, same time, same place, right here. Until then, take care, my friends.